Welcome back, Woo Crew. Ellie here, one half of the Woo Curious podcast, and I'm here with
Eileen, the other half of the Woo Curious podcast.
We're so excited today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the divine masculine and divine feminine archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Now, overall, this has nothing to do with being male, female, NB, trans, two-spirited, anything. Instead, it is an archetypal lens that we can put on and apply to our lives for us to better understand who we are and how we operate or fit in or sync in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So first, let's talk about what archetypes are. So the word, of course, derived from Latin. Arche is the meaning for first or translates to first. And type is the Latin word for model or kind. So this is the original of its time, the initial and eternal energy. They are patterns, universal, timeless, infinite, both light and dark. They use image yet no image, yet can fully capture them. It's like this like all-knowing, and yet you can't quite hold it in your hand. Je ne sais quoi.
Mm-hmm. And I love the timeless piece. Like we don't know where they came from.
They transcend.
Yeah.
I know that you have a book that you're going to do some reading from. Tell me a little bit about that book.
Yeah, I'm holding the guidebook for the Wild Unknown Archetypes Oracle deck by Kim Kranz, which we both have. If you follow Ellie on Instagram, you've probably seen her pull cards from it. They are circles, which is amazing. And the art is wonderful. Kim Kranz has lots of decks, at least a few that I know of, 4, I think. And she talks about their origin and has some really beautiful words that give us a sense of what archetypes are. The word itself was coined by Carl Jung. We all know that name. And he initially called them primordial images, which is evocative. Ooh. But then he landed on archetypes. And Kim says the name itself implies that these energies have been swirling since the beginning of time and are inherent in our very existence. They cannot be suppressed, denied, hidden, gotten rid of, or fixed, no matter how hard we try. We inherit them from the very universe, and they express themselves through us.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's good.
So the archetype of the divine masculine and the divine feminine are complementary and are meant to work in harmony with each other. So unlike, our current society, hang on, I'm just going to get up on my patriarchal high horse already. Unlike our current society where we have like, who's number one? What comes first? These two archetypes are really meant to operate in harmony or to exist in harmony as this really lovely ebb and flow, push and pull, complementary force to one another. Mm-hmm. So just because one is one thing and the other is another doesn't mean that we have this betterment or this ideology of what comes first. It's really just like a flowing of state and quality for who we really are. I also want to note this weekend I was at one of my favorite bookstores in Vancouver, and Kim Kranz now has a board game.
What?
I know. I almost picked it up.
Exciting.
It's kind of like Monopoly, Snakes and Ladders-esque. Those are very different games. But in the wheel, like kind of in the Wheel of the Year-esque, you go through different phases of life.
Oh, beautiful.
Kind of like around the board like Monopoly. But I feel like there was some like snakes and ladder element to it as well. Maybe that was just literal snakes on the box, which I could understand that. Speaking of snakes and the divine feminine, here we are.
Ooh, yeah, yes, indeed. Snakes are a great symbol of the divine feminine and shedding of skin and transformation and rebirth and all of that jazz.
Here we are.
There are so many rabbit holes here.
There's so many. We haven't even begun. Let's talk first about what the divine feminine is, the archetype. What is this? So we've laid this out in different qualities that the divine feminine embodies. And This is not like a checked mark list. I just want to be clear about this. They are individual. They sit as their own. And they make up this whole archetype. Again, this is not something that we can tangibly really hold in our hands. It's just this concept of how we can apply ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the first one is nurturing. It's really the ability, and when we think of the divine feminine archetype, I like instantly feel held. You know, it is this nurturing, energetic quality that we have the ability to care and to nourish for ourselves and for others with immense love and compassion.
Yeah, I have that held sense as well. I often talk about the divine feminine qualities of harmlessness and compassion, and I feel like that is held in the nurturing piece, right?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, another big one is intuition. So that really deep sense of inner knowing, of trusting one's instincts, of connecting to inner wisdom. And that's something that we'll be talking about lots in the coming weeks, how to tap into that intuitive piece that lives inside of us all.
Yeah. We also have emotional wisdom. This is a really interesting concept, especially I think in today's age. We talk a lot about emotional intelligence and cultivating emotional intelligence, but emotional wisdom is really the capacity to embrace and express emotions authentically. And this allows us to foster emotional intelligence. So this is like what comes first, and for us to foster our empathy. This doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be like highly empathetic individuals, but this quality of the archetype is in nature empathetic.
And hold space for others to have their emotional intelligence and empathy mature as well. Our next quality is creativity. And this one is multi-level, but the power to create, so to innovate, to bring forth new ideas, new art, but also new life. At its very heart, the archetype of the divine feminine is creative in that it is the force that brings new life into the world.
I feel like I have lots to say about creativity that I'm going to pause on for just a moment. I think that where we see this creative archetype quality, it really is in the quality of the mother. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a mother in order to create or to be creative, but it's literally birthing things into the world.
That's something that I've been sitting with, that concept of embodying the archetype of the mother without being a mother to a physical human child is something that comes up a lot for me as I am approaching the end of my fertility years, probably, and grappling with that. Am I going to? Probably not, but can I still be a mother? I've always felt motherly. Yeah, so that's a big, deep topic. It feels like.
Let's put a pin in this. We need to talk about this.
Yeah.
Next episode.
How many pins do we have?
Many.
Many pins.
I love that. Okay, so receptivity, qualities of the divine feminine archetype. Receptivity, being open to receiving love. This is something that like I talk about leaning back instead of leaning in. The like really, I feel like it's a felt sense of receptivity is that you're able to really intake, nourish, and embody in a lot of ways a lot of what's going on around us. So being open to receiving love, to be open to be receiving abundance, gifts from the universe, being receptive. I think a lot of times whenever we think about the quality and the energetics of the divine feminine in patriarchal society, it is considered passive. It's this like, you're not doing anything. And receptivity is really actually an active quality. And this also reminds me of this concept that is egg theory, the egg theory, or egg wisdom. And the egg wisdom is that the point of the egg is to attract the most ideal sperm. It's not the first sperm that gets there. It's not the biggest. It's not any of those things where we think of this hierarchical society that we live in. It's actually that the egg sits there and vibrates with its own wisdom until it finds the very right match and then opens up to receive. And
she gets
that,
to choose.
girl, you get to
Mm-hmm.
choose.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That is the essence for me of receptivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought that in, because as per usual, science is finally catching up to things that we've always known in our bones and didn't seem to make sense the other way around. The next one we have here is connection with nature. And I speak to this all the time. I think this has been my easiest path into connecting with my divine feminine, is that recognizing of the interconnectedness of all life and having a reverence for the natural world, for the more than human world. And I've been using that phrase. I used it through the last episode as well. And I just want to clarify what I mean by that. The more than human world is everything on this earth that is not human. It is the rocks. It is my computer. It is, the animals and the plants. Often we talk about other living beings. And there is a lot of wisdom in a lot of indigenous traditions that tell us of the wisdom of the stones. Australian Aboriginal wisdom, for instance, they talk about stones being ancestors. And so there's this sense of everything having some agency and wisdom and teaching and learning to give us. So that's that connection with nature and with a more than human world is a huge piece of this archetype that I really like working with.
It's also empowerment. Empowerment is embracing your own strength and resilience and the ability to birth and nurture new beginnings. So it's this concept of being able to connect to, again, that receptivity and then embody what it is that you are receiving.
Yeah, it is strong. The last point that we have here, or the last quality that we've listed, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, this is just what we came up with as we were thinking about what we wanted to speak to, is the idea of community. And so the divine feminine quality of holding community together, of non-competition, of understanding one another, that entanglement, that interconnection, again, of rising together. This one always calls to mind for me the wise woman who everybody in the community comes to for advice or for support or for medicines or for all of those things. It's like the hub of the wheel, the connection that holds everybody together is really encapsulated in that divine feminine essence.
And sometimes that archetype can even go further than just the divine feminine. We have the shaman, we have the witch, we have the healer, we have that person that you were speaking of is in and of itself an archetype as well.
Yes, there are archetypes within archetypes.
Sure.
As with so many things, as soon as we try to delineate and define, I know I find the more detailed I go, the more the interconnection and the complexity becomes.
Mm-hmm. I think that this is a good time to kind of switch into something else. I'm waving my arms around here that you can't see, but the concept here is that it's fine and dandy to think and to understand on a heady level and an intellectual level, like, okay, these qualities make up the divine feminine. So what? Like, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we apply this to our everyday life? I know that in a lot of coach spaces right now, the divine feminine, like embodying your divine feminine or feminine energy, or, run your business like this with more divine feminine energy. All of this is like, okay, great. What does that really mean? And why do we need that? And I think the 8 qualities that we just gave you are a good starting point for putting together this bigger picture of the divine feminine. And when we start, I want to first talk about the patriarchy, but I want to talk about it like, this is how we can really see the divine feminine in this contrast and this shadow work. And I want to talk about it from the point of view of the patriarchy tells us, at least tries to, depending on who you are, tells us to act a certain way, to do certain things. And this refers to a social, cultural, and political system in which the power and authority are predominantly held by men. Like, amen. This is eons. This is old. This is old. And it's like incessant. And we are literally born and raised into a patriarchal society. And it's so innocuous that we don't even realize what's happening here. So this actually has nothing to do with like being a man or being a woman, because the patriarchy can really influence or impact both those genders.
Yeah, harms
what
everybody.
This is, yeah, this is really that men are generally the primary decision makers and leaders in various aspects of society. And we lost ourselves in a moment a long time ago. We lost this reverence for the divine feminine, and the belief set in of the divine masculine, but not just even the divine masculine, well, the patriarchy was the way to go. We wanted more output. We wanted more work. We wanted more harvest, more yield, more. And we forgot this really like leaning back feminine embodiment of this archetype is needed to complement, to also make the world go round.
Yeah.
So
I like how this shows up in a lot of myths, older myths from cultures around the world, of this needing both to make harmony. There's one in particular about the well keepers in Ireland. It's a Celtic myth. And the women were the keepers of the wells, the priestesses were. And the kings had to go and ask their permission, or there was like a ceremonial wedding. It wasn't a real wedding between the keepers of the wells and the kings, in order for them to be able to rule the land well and have it be abundant and healthy. And when they broke with the keepers of the wells, there's a story about one king or prince killing the women who kept the wells, and the land became barren and everything died, and they couldn't, like, the crops failed and the animals died. And it's just this really deep meaning, or knowing that you need both.
You need both.
Yeah.
What else about the patriarchy? I do want to mention that this is really, the patriarchy has really bred the divine feminine out of us.
Yeah.
It has given the weight of society into production, and the divine feminine is the complete opposite of production.
Yeah. And I'd say too that the patriarchy with capitalism was like the combination of those two things have become relentless and so toxic. I feel like that word is just, some people will say it's overused, toxic masculinity, but that is what it comes down to, right? That's how it harms men, is in the toxic masculinity side. And we're going to talk about the divine masculine, which is not toxic masculine traits. But that combo has created this hustle culture, this grind culture, this you're only as valuable as your output and what you're producing. And all the female, quote unquote, traits have been turned into things to be ashamed of, or have been associated with being weak. And again, that harms people of all sexes and orientations.
Yeah, this is across the globe. This is across the board. This has become a social norm. This is why it's so innocuous that it's just like literally woven into us already. I think probably we need to also pin birthing, the woo side of birthing, especially with the knowledge that you have and the wisdom that you have from your life past.
Yes. Yes. I've been a witch for a long time. I just called myself a midwife.
Exactly.
I was going to say too, while we're here, this sense that we're not even aware of how much it is harming us, or how much it is woven in and not seen. It's bringing to mind the conversation that I had with my younger cousin. I went to visit my family in Ontario recently, where we were talking about the Barbie movie. And, there's a lot of criticisms around it. I mean, it was made by Mattel. So there's still that we can be everything. We can be lawyers and doctors. And I was talking to a counselor and she's like, can we just rest? I don't want to be all those things. I just want to rest. So there is that side of that. But the other side that I found really interesting speaking to him about that he'd completely missed was he was really upset about the way that the Barbies treated the Kens.
Oh,
and wow. Yeah, and he was upset about it because he thought that the movie was saying this would be better. And he completely missed that the movie was saying this is our lived reality. This is women's lived reality now. And he's quite a bit younger than me, and so every generation I think it's getting better, but he didn't know, he couldn't see it. He's a lovely human being. And I think I was able to impress upon him. I was like, nobody is saying that that's how we should be treating men, because we shouldn't be treating anyone that way.
But yet it happens every day.
But that is how we are. That's what we live. That's our experience to varying degrees in different situations. So it was interesting, and he heard me. He listened to me, which was good. I don't know if I completely convinced him, but I think I got the wheels in his head turning.
You reminded me one last thing about the patriarchy that I want to mention is that what's interesting for me is that at the time that we really see a shift in energy in the world, we see it because of a few things. And religion, sanctioned religion, is one of them. I'm going to change what I just said. The church is one of them. Let's call it what it is. Let's not call it sanctioned religion. Mm-hmm. And there is such a huge threat in society at this time because of the power of women.
Yeah.
And the power, because we could still have the patriarch and the matriarch. And that is not the patriarchy and the matriarchy, for that matter. Mm-hmm. It is something that is side by side, but different. And the patriarchy movement felt so threatened by this egg wisdom that we had. It felt so threatened that we were not in movement and leaning in, that we had just as much power leaning back, that they didn't know what to do with it. And so we get into things like the burning times, and we get into, of course, we get into the church and non-duality and all of these things. And here we are today with the Barbie movie. We went from that to here we are today with the Barbie movie.
Yeah, there was that sense of it was impossible to control and subdue the masses when there was so much knowledge and power in the collective, held often by women, but not just by women. But that sense of grassroots knowledge, power, collective community, you can't control people who are able to sufficiently govern and feed and heal and do all of the things for themselves. Why would they subject themselves to their sovereign? And so they had to remove the sovereignty of people in order to control them. And that's that beginnings of the burning times and everything that spirals from there.
This is a light topic.
It's a really light topic.
It's like something to get curious about when you're just going to bed at night. You're like, how does the patriarchy influence me? Like, let me count the ways.
Right, including and not limited to the wage gap.
Exactly. Talk to me about the wage gap.
Yeah, I'm sure that all of our listeners have heard this term, probably are fairly familiar with it, but it's just one of the ways that the vilification or the demonization of the divine feminine has created inequalities, and the way that the patriarchy and capitalism have capitalized on these inequalities. So we talk about equity, we talk about equality, women's movements, we've come a long way. And yet the wage gap hasn't shifted for quite a long time. And I was looking up some stats before we came on today. And in Canada, the national average wage gap is 13%. So I take that to mean that women are earning 87 cents on the dollar, on a man's dollar for the same roles. Though Ellie's in BC, I'm in Alberta, and the wage gap in those two provinces is 17%. So pretty much the same as in America, which we like to think we're better than. Not you and I personally, Canadians in general. Generally, we like to put our standards of living and all that jazz against America and feel like we have some sort of superiority there, but we don't. In the US, women earn on average 82 cents on the dollar, but that's a really kind of gross representation of what's actually going on there, because educated white women obviously are earning more, and Latina women are like the lowest paid for multiple reasons. There's the issue of race, there's the issue of the politics between Mexico and the States, and then there's the issue of what types of jobs are traditionally held by women, and then even more so by women of color.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about the gender gap. Speaking of this, the gender gap is really the jobs that are traditionally held by women. So we think about all of the great mother jobs. We have things like service and caregiving and mothering and artist even, or psychic, or a stay-at-home mom. All of these jobs are traditionally, even nurse, I'm thinking of that now, are traditionally associated with a female or a feminine role. And I think it's curious as I just think about this, a lot of these jobs are jobs where, in a sense, they are innate for women as caregivers, as the great mother, as the divine feminine. And therefore, no higher education is needed. Yes, of course, there's higher education needed for things like even midwife. Of course, you have been through this, for nursing, for caregiver, for artist, psychic, all of these things. And they are roles that women are often boxed into because they are innate or they're natural in some women, in the greater archetype of woman, in that sense. So the gender gap really is that you get to do what you are already good at, in quotations, but we're going to pay you less.
Yeah, all those jobs are devalued by society. And that prime example is that stay-at-home mom, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm I'm not working." Really? They've added up the hours. Stay-at-home moms put in an average of 80 hours a week of work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's just like, "Oh, I'm just a stay-at-home mom."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, tell me what you really do though.
Yeah, right. They're also often very emotional labor heavy jobs, which very, very frequently at home, the woman, if it's a bisexual relationship.
Heterosexual. Bisexual as well, though. Pansexual also fits. Trans relationships also could fit in
like
here.
Two sexes in the house. Oh my goodness. If it's a heterosexual relationship where you have a woman and a man cohabiting, often the woman is the one who is taking on the role of emotional labor in the relationship, in friend groups, in with workplaces too, and in parenting and everything. It's kind of just, it falls to us, even if we're not particularly quote unquote feminine. It just becomes that piece of labor, and it's not equally shared, and it's taxing, but it's unseen.
It's true. And I think that the roles that we play in our household are ripple effects of greater society, often of the society that we live in, and layered with let's call them the rules that we get to play by, that we get to choose what we want to play by.
Yeah. I'd love to pop in a little tidbit here too, which ties in the gender gap and the wage gap, really sums it up with a neat little bow. So midwives in Ontario 2 years ago now, I want to say, went to the Human Rights Tribunal to petition for a better wage because they are doing the same work and the same hours as general practitioners who do maternity care. There's a lot of crossover between them and OBs. Obviously, they're not surgeons, but there is a lot of crossover, and they're being paid significantly less. So they took their case to the Human Rights Tribunal. They won. And after they won, the government pulled their funding from their college so that they had to pay more into their college in order to be able to pay for like insurance and complaints. So basically they lost.
I like the rage that I feel over this is really, we're going to talk about sacred rage in a bit.
It's real rage. Yeah. When I left my career as a midwife, I became funded in 2011 in Alberta, and I left last year in 2022, and we had never had a cost of living increase.
Wow.
Yeah. So just a couple little lived examples for you all listening. For anyone who's like, is it really real though? Not that I think anyone listening is going to be questioning that.
No. Let's switch gears and talk about the women are too emotional and therefore weak. And let's just throw in here, they're on their period.
Oh yes, heaven forbid a woman have emotion. I feel like this comes back into the sacred rage piece, that some emotions, okay, I have two things to say here. One, some emotions are permitted, they are acceptable, but they do make us weak. And some emotions are not allowed. And this goes both ways because there's some that aren't allowed for boys as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And some that are permitted that make them strong. So it's that flip side. It gets me so angry because it is so possible to hold strong emotion. And that strong emotion might be anguish or sadness or tears, and still be effective and still be strong. In fact, you have to be strong to hold emotion. I think that's the end of my thought there for a moment. I imagine you have things to add to it.
Well, I want to say that what's curious for me here is how it's been used as an excuse for women to not be qualified for certain work or roles, or to be boxed back into that role of like the mothering. And that for me is something that I am, yes, ragey about, but also it really for me comes back to this, like the power is not in the force. The power is in the knowing. It's in the wisdom. Yeah. And so when we come to this whole like, oh, you're too emotional, or, you know, the debate, how many years now, especially as you and I are the same mintage, how many years have we gone through, like, when will we get a female president or a female prime minister? You know, when will this happen? And so close with a few people in the US. And yet the discussion is, you know, women are just too emotional to hold a role of power. And I think about some of the women that I've worked for in the federal government as leads and or generals in the departments that I worked in. I think most of the time, the work, from my perspective, the work that got done is by those individuals who were too emotional.
Oh my, I have so much to say. It's so true. And there are okay, first of all, we have to just name drop like Angela Merkel. And I don't know her name, and I should, but the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who recently stepped down because she has boundaries. And also, they've done some studies in Europe where having women in positions of power is more common because they went through the burning times first, and it's like we're
We're
falling,
catching
we're
up.
in a bit of a loop. There, a lot of those countries are a little bit ahead of us, and they've done studies, and companies that have women in the C-suite positions, so CEO, CFO, all those, they have better employee retention because people are actually happy to go to work. They feel valued, community. They are more profitable. They are more profitable across the board. So even when we talk us into the system that is, which I still have a lot of umbrage to take with, because I don't think that we should have this every day you're on constant go, go, go. We touched on that in the cyclical living episode last week. But when you do have us in those positions, we do real good. We do better.
And also, we're going to talk a bit about female energy in the coming episodes as well. And like women's energy is that lunar cycle. We talked about this last week. It's that lunar cycle. And male energy is a 24-hour loop of testosterone. Just gets renewed every day. And I think this idea around like, okay, what's next? What's new? Is the emphasis is put on there because there's more action that's happening as I snap my fingers. Who said that was okay? Who said that was like number one? Who said? I want to know. Do you want to talk a little bit about For the Love of Men by Liz Plank?
I do, yeah. We're gonna have to put together a Woo Crew book list at some point here. That's
resource
coming.
List.
TBA. But this is a book. It's called For the Love of Men, from a toxic to a more something in masculinity. I can't remember the subtitle right now, but basically she speaks about how the patriarchy harms men. And one of the points that she talks about in this book that I was like, oh my gosh, of course. This, I don't know why it makes so much sense, but it did immediately because it feels true. There was a study that they did on little girls and little boys around emotional regulation. And when left to their own devices and told that emotions are okay and they have a safe, supportive environment where they're allowed to express the full range of emotions, little boys are actually more, quote unquote, emotional than little girls. They have a stronger range of emotions. So they're less emotionally regulated, is what it is. It's not that little girls have a smaller range of emotions, but little boys are less emotionally regulated by nature than little girls.
You heard it here first, Woo Crew.
And then, of course, we beat it out of them, quite literally, for a lot of years, that they had to stuff down and suppress those emotions. And the only ones they were allowed to express were rage and anger and manliness, whatever.
Frustration,
all those secondary emotions that bubble up when you're not allowed or you don't even have the language to express what you're really feeling.
Yeah, I hear this.
Yeah. So how does
this play out in life?
Yes.
Here we are. How does this play out in life? It plays out in ways that are like the jobs that we have access to, aka that are actually open for hire. The work that we get to do as a divine feminine is sometimes limited. It plays out in being the main person who takes maternity leave. We do need it. We need a maternity show. AKA the female is often the one, or the divine feminine is often the one that puts their career on hold to child rear. And it's expected that the mom is the one that's going to take all of the time. Now,
yeah, it's like very recently that we've gotten parental leave, which is a great step. And we can talk about the things that people will say. Oh, dad's home with the kids. You are such a great father. Oh,
stop.
They very well might be, but like, if mom's home with the kids, do you call them such a great father?
Yeah, or a great mother. Can't.
No. Sorry, yes, mother.
This also plays out in how we are judged by our looks. So how we dress, if our hair is short or long, the shoes that we wear, from a like heel to something frumpy in quotations. I worked for mental health in BC at one point in my life. And it was my first day of work. And the assistant to the director, or the top position, came up to me and said, "Do you have any shoes that are less frumpy?" And I literally was like, I forgot my shoes at home, number one. Number two, these are rain boots because it's raining. I'll bring something a little bit more, I guess, elegant tomorrow.
Oh,
And that job, I wore bubblegum pink high heels the whole time and clippity clapped around. And I loved it.
Yeah. I have been asked if I wear makeup ever in job interviews.
Oh, wow.
And been denied serving roles because I wouldn't wear heels.
Oh, my.
For sure.
My.
This point, actually, too, I just saw a really great little, I think it was a reel, probably these days, it always is, of interviewers asking male athletes questions that female athletes get all the time, and their responses, it was great. They were like, what are you like, what the fuck, what do you mean, why are you, like, what's going on? They were so confused. Like, can you give us a twirl and show us your outfit? And
stop.
They
stop.
Stop. And this is what we get all the time. This is the Kens.
We also experience imposter syndrome. And I have a funny reference. Last night, my lover and I were watching The Big Bang Theory, and it's the final season of The Big Bang Theory. And it is a show that I have grown to adore some of the characters. And it's not my thing, but jumped on the train, as my lover is one that watches it all the time and really, really enjoys it. Anyway, at one point, Sheldon and Amy, two of the main characters, published this asymmetry theory, and two other individuals try to take it from them and claim that they are the original asymmetry publishers, and they are on Ellen, and they're doing all of these things. Anyways, Amy Fowler loses her shit to them and is like, you can't have imposter syndrome because you are imposters. You're not the real deal when it comes to this. We are the ones that have imposter syndrome. If you're an imposter, you can't have that. And I really, felt the struggle of imposter syndrome at points in my life, and I felt recognized and seen.
Oh, yeah. And it's so pervasive. There's another study. I'm full of studies today where they looked at why there are more men in higher level positions inside of many companies. And they found that men are far more likely to apply for a role where they have, 8 out of 10 of the qualifications, or 7 or 6 out of, they have some of the qualifications, but not all of them. But they have the attitude of, I'll apply for it anyways. And so they get hired. Whereas women will be like, well, I have 9.75 of the qualifications, but that 0.25, like, I can't. They told me I needed that qualification to apply, so I won't. And that's where imposter syndrome gets us, because both sexes experience the feeling, but we let it hold us back because we've been told to, because that makes us good.
I think I'm reflecting on what you just said, and I'm like, wow, 8 out of the 10 qualifications. I thought you were going to say 2 out of the 10 qualifications.
I don't know.
A gentleman
trying to be generous.
But yeah, thank you for being generous. I worked for a gentleman in the federal government, and I remember him bragging that he studied 2,500 hours to get this job. And I literally was like, dude, if you had to study that much to get this like mid-range managerial position, like, guy, my goodness. And speaking of guy, another way that we start to see how this plays out in our lives is when we shop for cars, when we shop for houses, when we apply to get bank loans, and especially if you are a single woman. If you are a single woman who is trying to buy a house, who may have a dependent, like if you have children as a single woman, may the goddess be with you, because that is a very uphill battle. And I think you have a story about your friend paying off.
Oh yeah, this is when we're talking about how it plays out in those traditionally masculine dominated areas. There's a friend who will probably be listening to this, so she's going to recognize herself in the story, but I remember her telling a group of us that she went to the bank to pay off a lump sum on her mortgage, because part of her plan, and she's very money savvy, is to pay off her mortgage quickly So she's not paying all that interest. And she has the means to do this. And she got there to put this lump on, which her mortgage allows for. And the teller at the bank, I believe, tried to convince her it was a bad idea and asked if her husband knew about what she was doing. Y'all can't see it, but Ellie's eyebrow just went like up under her hat.
I have no time for this.
Steam.
Steam.
In any case, I'm sure she told him very firmly and politely with an edge where he could take his opinions, and paid off that lump.
You go, sister. You go.
Yeah. Okay, so clearly there's way more we can go into on all of these topics. We've got podcasts for years, you guys. Better be along.
Yeah.
We've taken a lot of time and a fairly deep dive into the divine feminine, but we do want to touch on the divine masculine. This is going to be a bit of a cursory overview just to give you a feel for it. So we recognize that we are not giving equal time to both topics today, but there might be some equity in that too. So kick us off with some of the qualities of the divine masculine, Ellie. So the first quality that we'll mention of the divine masculine is that quality of protecting or being a protector. So the innate desire to protect themselves, their families, their communities. And I think that's when we can all recognize it can go too far. As with any of these traits, same with the feminine, they can become toxic when pushed too far or to extremes. But in its essence, it's that warm, like protecting, safe feeling with the divine masculine.
I like my nervous system just went, I am here for this. The next one is reason and logic. It's really the flip side to intuition, and it's the ability to make decisions with reason and logic as complementary actions to intuition. So again, not one is outweighing the other, and of course we have shadow side to both, but it's just a really lovely masculine trait.
Yeah, and we need both. We need both with all of them. Strength is another one, and that's a pretty obvious one, but we're talking about the nuances of strength, right? It's not just physical. So it's the ability to overcome challenges, it's resilience, it's the physical strength in the manifest plane, but it's also in the non-physical realm. So it's that sense of strength, or that air of strength as well, that the divine masculine carries about it.
Then we have the emotional strength quality. So similar to this, like emotional intuition and emotional wisdom that the divine feminine carries, the emotional strength is the capacity to hold emotions for the community and their relationship. So it's like the container that the wisdom can be fed into.
And I think this one's so important because of what the patriarchy has done to not allowing or giving men emotions. And so there is the divine masculine has deep emotions and strong emotions. And it's a wonderful side of this that one of the most exciting things when we start talking about the divine masculine for me is this piece of bringing that in. It's also a lot about action and assertiveness. And so we talked about how the egg wisdom, it's receptivity. It's not passive, though. Often we think active, passive. And so in this case, we're balancing active with receptive. So the masculine is action, it's assertiveness, a willingness to take initiative, risk taking, chasing the dream, that kind of forward leaning energy is the masculine.
Then we have stability. And stability here is really like, in essence, sovereignty. It is individuality. It's the ability to stand in their truth, even when the truth changes. So if like this moment, this is true, the next moment, the wind is blowing the other way, we're going to go the other way. For the archetype quality of stability, we also have this grounding and earthy energy. It's about having integrity, which is really doing what you say.
And then just like the divine feminine, we have empowerment, but we're using the term power here because, again, that just feels more masculine. So embracing that inner strength, embracing that resilience, protecting the things that the feminine is birthing into the world. There's a lot of overlap.
that container again.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an archetype within an archetype, really, which is the king, the warrior, the magician, or the magi, and the lover. And these are often the archetypal roles the divine masculine plays. So when we see the divine masculine in those roles, we can start to get a better view, a better picture. Again, with an archetype, it's this thing that's really hard. It's not tangible. It's hard to hold. But when we see it in these other roles, then it gives us a better perspective of like, oh, that's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. That's how it can be embodied.
That's how it can be embodied, is right.
So we've touched a bunch of times already on toxic masculinity, because it's the masculinity that we have the most of in our society because of the patriarchy and the way that it has raised boys and girls for ages. And it's that, what's in it for me? It's that I don't care who I have to step on to get to the top. It's that women are subservient and less valuable, and they should be kowtowing to my needs. You know, they're here to be barefoot in the kitchen and pregnant.
Oh
There's
my.
also that like constant need to prove that you're a real man. And what the heck does real man even mean? It's intangible as well, and that keeps them in that constant hustle to prove, constantly trying to live up to this standard that doesn't really exist.
Okay, the next social constraint that we have is not being in touch with their feminine side. So often we see this as qualities that are lack of nurturing, loving, and caring energy, yet they're encouraged to express their emotions whenever they get expressed in a violent or anger or sacred rage, or not even sacred, just rage way. So the feminine side of things is looked upon as, what are you, a girl? The discount and disqualification of the feminine side of the archetype as something that is continued to be less than.
Mm-hmm. And so there is that sense of, oh, that makes you a lesser man, or it makes you girly or a pussy, or
Gosh.
right, all those derogatory terms that mean girl or female, and it ends up being that they express the only way that they can and is allowable is that violent anger. The sacred rage is gone, because being in touch with sacred rage requires being in touch with the full range of emotions. I think is the saddest part is that they literally often don't have the words. They don't know what they're feeling or how to talk about it, and their only recourse is to shut down or explode.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. And then, of course, coming into that sexual archetype, or the conqueror archetype, and this being rewarded for more notches in the bedpost, or oh, like I love the line in Taylor Swift's "If I Were a Man." It's that sense that, like, a woman sleeps around and she's a slut, a man sleeps around and he's a player, and the player is not a bad word the way that slut is. And that's harmful for a lot of men too, because they are emotional, and they have to be callous to play out this role.
I was just looking at Instagram. There's this really great reel from a queer comedian named Ali Belair's. And you can find her at Ali, 2 L's, ALLI _ Belair's. And she says that part of the meme is, I should be insulted that you're referring to me as a man. But you know what? When I'm in the workplace, I want to make that he, him money. When I'm in the streets, I am she, her. And I think this is a great reference here as we talk about the divine masculine archetype, is that we have definitely, as female embodied individuals, we have qualities of the divine masculine that we can and do want to embody. And I think that Ali just plays on that really well. How does this really show up for people? We really talked about this as we explained the archetype and the social constraints. We have men not able to use and express their emotions, and therefore explosions and or shutdown. Men who are all conquering, no matter if it's work, if it's play, if it's their partner preference, if it's not child rearing because they did their job, in quotations, their job is done. And interesting, higher rates of suicide and depression. It plays out in so many different ways when you are not able to express yourself. When men are not able to express the divine masculine, they have less range. And for anyone who has experienced somebody in their life that really embodies that divine masculine as a person in a female body, it feels like I can just be taken care of, that I can just do the things that I need to do. Can I talk a little bit about this in the world of queers?
Please.
As somebody who identifies as queer, this is something that, as I started to really embrace the divine feminine, this is many years ago, as I started to learn about it through becoming a yoga teacher and understanding, we have Kali, who is our archetype for sacred rage. We have the Great Mother. We have all of these archetypes, as well as Shiva and Shakti. And we have this complementary force that we see so many times in, I want to say, mythology, in storytelling, and in recount, So in the queer world, there's been many times where somebody has asked me, so who's the man in a same-sex relationship? And I often, as quippy as I am, wanted to turn around and be like, oh, yeah, tell me who the man is in your relationship as well. Because we get to decide who embodies that sacred masculine and that sacred feminine, for that matter. But often what happens, what I've seen in the queer community, is that you still have complementary archetypes, regardless of who you were assigned at birth or who you embody in this present moment. So regardless of trans, NB, two-spirit, regardless of queer, straight, pansexual, bisexual, any lesbian, gay, whatever you want to identify as, regardless of those things, there is still an archetypal role. And what I've noticed, because in the queer community, we play by the rules way less. We say, here's the middle finger to those rules. I'll show you what I want. And I think especially as we've come a long way in the last couple of years, Stonewall was not that long ago. And we have really excelled in the last couple of years in embodiment and expression. And I think the beauty of being a queer is that we actually get to choose, still with the same social constructs that everybody else has, but with a different automatic ideology for the most part, where we just say, I'll do what I want.
Almost like you got to step out of the box, or you stepped out of the box that society said you had to be, which is straight. And then by stepping out, you got to choose what to put in your new box. Like, it's almost that, like, one tiny piece is almost easier to be like, I'm going to say who I am, but I'm already out of the box. So the box's walls can't hold me.
The box walls cannot hold me, people. Literally cannot hold me. And I get to choose every day what goes into that box. And so today, if I'm like, you know what, we've got to get more done, then I have more masculine energy. And on days where I am like, let's just get into this flow. And the priestess work that I do is just pure divine feminine. But to run the business, it's divine masculine.
We need both.
We need both.
I think that for me, stepping into this work of being a witch and of being a spiritual coach has been my own healing and my own invitation of the divine feminine in, because I lived in my masculine for most of my life. And so it's been my own journey, which now gives me the ability to help show other people that journey, because society doesn't value it. So it's really hard to step into and embody. And it's a practice day after day after day. And I think it came through really clear for everybody that we're not saying, obviously, that you go all in on your divine feminine. You need both. That balance is there. But often it's the divine feminine qualities that get neglected, that get pushed aside, that we ignore, we devalue them. And so it's important to start nurturing them and comes back to that, like, be kind to yourself. If you're just starting to think about this and learn about this, you might be surprised by how, even if you're in a female body, how many of those masculine and more toxic masculine traits you embody. That's normal. You live in this world, in this culture that tells you that that's what you should strive to be. So be gentle, be gentle. Don't make yourself wrong.
Don't make yourself wrong.
Okay. Woo crew. Thank you so much for listening. That's a wrap from us. Bye for now.